Hello everyone, I'm Landry Simo, and today I'm sharing a personal decision that will radically change the course of my life and challenge everything you thought you knew about education. For years, I've been a university professor in several countries, and many times when I say this, people always ask me, are you like a student or a professor? Because I actually started very young, so I sacrificed many years of my life and my childhood working hard because I early knew I wanted to be a university professor in order to give tools to many people, in order to allow them to dream big in their life. So I sacrificed many years working very hard in order to become a university professor, and I achieved that purpose quite early. So I've taught thousands of students. I watch parents invest everything they had into their kids, their children's future, filled with hope. But today, I need to tell you something that will shock many. But my intention isn't to provoke or stir outrage, but to reveal truth about the education system, truth that everyone needs to hear. The education system is, let's say, deeply dysfunctional. Yes, it is dysfunctional, and dysfunctional is the word. And actually, this is putting it mildly. This isn't about, a few cracks here and there. This is a deep structural failure. So let me explain what I mean by that. Starting with what may be the hardest part, the hardest truth to accept. Education has become a business. This didn't come as a surprise to me. It is a flaw that bothered me for many years. But I tried to overlook that flaw. But I can't anymore. Not after the system targeted our children, exposing them to indoctrination and even putting their well-being at risk. So this system, which is normally supposed to nurture and protect, went after my own child. And that was the breaking point for my decision. I'm here today to tell you the full story. You will see how unbearable this has become and why I can no longer remain complicit in a system that I once served. If I hadn't made it a point to ask my son every single day about what he was learning in school, I wouldn't know what I know now. And certainly, I wouldn't have made the decision to pull him out of the system, to take charge of his education myself. And that's what I'm doing now. So you're going to understand why it's so crucial to always ask your children about what happened in school. What do they learn? What do they do every day in school? So before I share my son's story, let me explore some of the deeper systemic flaws I've seen from the inside as a professor. Let's start with how education has been commercialized. Yeah, commercialized. When you enroll your child in school or maybe in a university, you think you are giving them a place to learn, to grow, and to build their future. But in reality, many institutions see your child as nothing more than a customer. A customer. University admits students who aren't even academically prepared simply because they can't pay tuition fees. And those fees, let's talk about that. They skyrocket every year, even as the real value of degrees declines. So meanwhile, the quality of education plummets every year. So worse still, degrees have become luxury products. You've heard of those so-called prestigious universities. So let me name a few: Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. They sell a status symbol, not education. If you really want to gain knowledge and skills, you could learn the same content at a far less famous university. People need to understand this. I have taught master's students who graduated from prestigious schools and others from local universities in Africa, in Europe, in Asia. And you know what? Once they were in my classroom, their performance was often undistinguishable. So I could hardly tell who came from Harvard and who came from the University of Cham, for example, or even, let's say, the University of Vigo or the University of Sevilla. I couldn't distinguish. So the only real difference between Harvard and, say, a public university in France, in Spain, in Africa, is networking opportunities and fancy tech gadgets that often have little educational value. You have to understand this reality. So the world needs to wake up to the fact that these so-called elite institutions are marketing machines. They use unethical tactics to maintain an image of exclusivity, and I might even reveal some of those tactics later. It's shocking, but let's shift our focus to what this system does to, our children. The education system is designed to produce obedient workers, not independent thinkers, not at all. The curriculum is structured so students follow instructions, memorize information, and most importantly, don't ask too many questions. This is kind of silently forbidden. But is that really what we want for our children? A world where their natural curiosity is stifled so they can fit into, a box defined by standardized tests. Let's talk about those tests, those exams. Let's talk about them. You think they measure intelligence? They don't. They measure memory. And memory is just a crutch for intelligence, not intelligence itself. Yet we treat these exams as if they are like the ultimate proof of a child's worth. And it gets worse. Do you know who decide what our children learn in school? Major corporations. They dictate the curriculum to ensure there is always a workforce trained exactly to their specifications. Not to meet children's needs, but to fulfill corporate, let's say, agenda, ideological agenda or business agendas. So we aren't raising leaders, we are raising future employees trained to comply, to obey. Meanwhile, teachers, those who should be at the heart of this system, are completely neglected. From kindergarten to university, they are underpaid, they are overworked and forced to follow absurd instructions, guidelines that prevent them from, truly teaching, doing their job, their passion. So what does that lead to? It leads to burnout. It leads to, ultimately a decline in the quality of education. But this is just the surface. Let's dig deeper. Who really benefits from this system? Certainly not working class families. Education perpetuates inequality. Elite schools are only accessible to the wealthy people, while everyone else is left to fend for themselves. This is the truth. How can our children have equal opportunities when the entire system is designed to favor those who already have everything? How? And when the system fails, and believe me, it fails very often, what does it do? It hides it. It hides its failures. Cheating is institutionalized. In many countries, schools and universities manipulate grades and cover up failures to protect their reputation, their prestige. But at what cost? The cost of truth, the cost of our children's future, the cost of our well-being as a humanity. So do you see why I can't stay silent anymore? Why I can't remain complicit in this system as a professor? because this isn't just about education, it's about justice, it's about humanity, it's about our future, our collective future. So what angers me the most is that this system destroys the creativity of our children. Have you ever observed a 4-year or let's say 5-year-old? They are bursting with curiosity and imagination. But give them a few years in this system and look at what's left. You'll be shocked. They are taught to conform, to adapt, but to never step out of line, to never ask questions, to never think differently. But does the world really need more conformity, or does it need dreamers, innovators, rebels? But wait, that's not all. The system doesn't, just crush creativity. It also deprives our children of essential life skills needed to thrive in a modern world. Let's take something as fundamental as financial literacy. Something like as basic as that. Ask yourself this: why do our children spend years learning abstract theories but are never taught how to manage their personal finances? Basic concepts like budgeting, saving, or even how to avoid falling into the traps of consumer credit are completely absent from most curriculum. And this is very, it makes no sense, because we should be preparing them for real life. And the result, they graduate from school or university completely unprepared for even the most basic financial decisions. This is a global problem. So while our children are busy solving equations they will likely never use in their real life, no one is teaching them how to avoid drowning in lifelong debt. No one. And then there is another issue, an issue we rarely discuss: mental health. Do you know how many children suffer from anxiety, depression, because of the relentless pressure they are under? This is huge. So massive student loans, endless stress, and the constant message that they are never good enough. They are never good enough. And yet, mental well-being is completely ignored in most education systems because schools aren't equipped to address these issues. So worse, they often exacerbate them. Teachers are overworked and unable to provide support, while parents feel helpless. For those who don't fit in the system, there is a prepackaged solution: medication. If you don't fit in the system, there's medication. In many countries, children who are deemed too restless or inattentive or even slightly hyperactive are prescribed pills to fix them. But does the system adapt its teaching method to these children? Of course not. It's easier to make them conform with medication. And I find it very horrendous. So this really enrages me. These children don't lack potential. What they lack is an environment that respects the way they learn, the way they think, the way they see the world. And it doesn't stop there. Look at those extracurricular activities and preparatory classes. Students from wealthy families can afford private tutors, they can afford sports, they can afford music lessons and prep courses. Everything that enhances a CV or maybe a university application. But the rest, they don't have that chance. The result, even if you are brilliant, if your parents can't afford these extras, you start with a massive disadvantage. And that's not fair. That's not equality. And speaking of injustice, let's talk about international students. This one is particularly infuriating. Do you know why universities aggressively recruit them? Recruiting international students is not to promote diversity or cultural exchanges. Absolutely not. It's because they pay much higher tuition fees. So these students often come from countries where their families must sacrifice everything they've got, to provide them with this opportunity of studying abroad. So they arrive with the hope of a better future, but are often left to fend for themselves. No support, no interaction, no integration. They are seen as cash cows to fund the system. Meanwhile, local students lose admission spots because they don't generate as much profit. People need to understand this reality. It's really outrageous. I've been on admission panels in different countries, and it's truly sickening to see how this works. This is horrendous. And even when a student manages to graduate, what happens next? Do you think that degree guarantees them a job? Not at all. Absolutely not. The curriculums are so outdated that many graduates find themselves unemployed, unable to secure work in their chosen field. And yet the system keeps selling the same lie, the same dream. Go to university and everything will work out. But for many, it doesn't work out. For many, it doesn't work. They live with a piece of paper and a mountain of debt, of student loan. Now, let's talk about internship. Those so-called essential professional experiences. Do you know how many of these internships are actually unpaid? So students go and work and they are not paid. Students are asked to work for free, often in precarious conditions, under the guise of it being, for their own good, for their well-being. But in reality, companies are exploiting their labor without offering a real compensation. And what's worse here, if a student refuses to take an unpaid internship, they often can't graduate. Where is the choice in that? Where is the choice? But this exploitation isn't limited to students. Many teachers, many researchers are victims as well. Adjunct professors, PhD candidates, and even postdoctoral researchers are often overworked and unpaid, or let's say underpaid. They are placed under immense pressure to publish papers, and here is the kicker. They often have to pay. So we often have to pay to get our research published. Can you imagine that? And what happens next? The public has to pay again to access that research. So essentially, academics work for free, publish for private companies, and no one truly benefits except those companies. Do you think this is normal? Because I always thought I was stupid being part of that system. What bothers me even more is how the system systematically excludes parents. Yes, you, the parents, who wants the best for your children. In many schools, your concerns are ignored, overlooked. If you ask questions about the curriculum, about the teaching method, you are treated as you are in the way, you are an obstacle. But who knows your child better than you? Who? No one. Obviously no one. So this system actively pushes parents aside, as if your voice doesn't matter. And now we get into an even more sensitive issue. The education system has stopped being a neutral space. It has become a battlefield for ideological agendas. And this is like very surprising. What shocks me is how these battles are imposed on children, often without their knowledge or the consent of their parents. Take the growing confusion around gender identity. In some schools, children as young as 5 or 6 are told they can choose their gender. Can you imagine that? And this is not done through nuanced discussions tailored to their age, but as if it is a simple decision to be made between art classes and recess. I can't understand. But why impose this on children at an age when they are still learning how to read, how to write, and how to understand the world? Why? Shouldn't they be focusing on their natural development, their dreams, and even their curiosity? I think that should be the focus, but instead we are ignoring essential skills like math, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, problem solving, in favor of introducing ideas that most adults struggle to process. By imposing this on children. So the indoctrination of children as young as 5 into complex and ideologically charged concepts such as gender identity is a profound violation of their cognitive and emotional development. Scientific research consistently demonstrates that young children lack the neurological maturity to process abstract concepts of identity and self-perception. It's shown by many studies. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and understanding long-term consequences of our decisions, does not fully develop until mid-20s. Can you imagine that? So introducing life-altering ideas at an age when children are still learning to distinguish between fantasy and reality is not only irresponsible, but also potentially harmful. And the shocking part is all of this is done intentionally. So for individuals experiencing gender dysphoria, the science reveals a far more complex and nuanced picture than, let's say, the simplistic narrative pushed by certain ideological movements. But no one is going to tell you about these studies. Studies including those published in the American Journal of Psychiatry and even I think in the Journal of Sexual Medicine show that individuals who undergo gender reassignment surgery often experience similar or slightly higher rates of suicide, compared to those who do not transition. But people have to know about this. A 2020 study analyzing Swedish population data highlighted that even post-surgery, individuals had a suicide rate 90 times higher than the general population. 19 times. So this data exposes a critical flaw. Transitioning, often portrayed as the ultimate solution, does not inherently resolve the deep psychological distress associated with gender dysphoria. But, they are bringing these kind of issues into kids' brains, compounding the issues, therapies that aim to explore underlying factors that contribute to dysphoria and reinforce an individual's acceptance of their biological sex have shown promising results. They really show promising results. Research indicates that many children who experience feeling of gender incongruence, as they call it, naturally desist by adulthood. This is shown in many studies. For example, a comprehensive review published in a famous journal, I think it's Frontier in Psychology, found that around 61 and 98% of children who experience gender dysphoria eventually reconcile with their biological sex, if not, let's say, medically or socially transitioned prematurely. Yet in many countries, therapeutic approaches aimed at affirming biological reality are vilified. They are restricted or outright banned, replaced instead by a kind of one-size-fits-all affirmation model that that often funnels children towards irreversible medical decisions and interventions. So what is even more alarming is the lack of fully informed consent. Many people, many individuals who undergo these kind of procedures later express deep regret, realizing they were not adequately informed about the lifelong consequences, including sterility, loss of sexual function, and also increased health risks. The silence surrounding this regret is deliberate. This is really intentional. It protects an agenda that prioritizes ideology over science and human well-being. People really have to understand this. So dragging 5-year-olds into this agenda is not just unethical, it's horrifying, it's horrendous. We must question why a system claiming to protect children is pushing them into irreversible decisions they cannot possibly understand. This is not education. This is clearly not education. This is ideological colonization. This is colonization, marked as hidden behind progress. So, and this is an isolated incident. It is a part of a global pattern of moral and ideological indoctrination. In many schools, specific political, social, or cultural ideas are being pushed, leaving parents completely out of the decision-making process. Traditional values, those that many families hold dear, are often dismissed as outdated. But why is this ideological war being waged on the back of our children? Why can't the rights of families to guide their own values be respected? Let's take it further. Let's talk about the sexualization of children. In some schools, sex education programs introduce explicit and often shocking content to children at age far too young to comprehend it. They can't comprehend it. As a parent, imagine your 8-year-old child or 6-year-old child being exposed to a concept that even many teenagers will struggle to understand. Imagine that. Were you consulted before this was taught to your child? Not at all. And the worst part is these programs are often labeled as necessary, as educational, when in reality they undermine the child or the role of parents and create unnecessary confusions in children's brains. But it's not just the content, it's the relationship that are also affected. In many cases, schools actively turn children against their parents. Yes, there are lessons where children are taught that their parents, their traditions, and their beliefs are unreliable. Instead, they are encouraged to look to the school or even to look to the state to find the truth. But what happens when this sacred bond between parents and child and children is broken? You are left with a society of weakened families and vulnerable children. I think they don't realize how the harm they are doing to these kids, to the children. And it doesn't stop there. Parents are systematically excluded. You are not consulted on the curriculum, the teaching method, or the value instilled in your kids, in your children. And if you dare to question or if you dare to oppose the system, you are labeled as problematic. But why? Why does the system refuse to work with parents, the very people who know their children best? Meanwhile, prestigious schools perpetuate the illusion of exclusivity. They reject qualified applicants, not because they lack merit, but to maintain an image of scarcity, increasing their prestige, and of course, increasing their profits. This is an elaborate lie, yet families are willing to sink into debt to access these institutions. And here is something even more troubling: the political lobbying that controls curriculums. What your children are taught isn't decided by educators or experts. It is dictated by interest groups, by corporations, by politicians who want to ensure that their ideas and values dominate. This is what really happens. And what happens to topics that don't serve their agendas or aren't considered, let's say, profitable? They are simply dismissed, erased. This is how it works. And all of this leads to another painful truth. The system rewards obedience, but not curiosity. It actually punishes curiosity. Take a look at what gets rewarded in schools. Following the rules, staying silent, doing exactly what you're told. But what happens if a child asks too many questions or dares to think differently? They are labeled as a problem. But let's ask ourselves, does the world need more people who blindly follow instructions? Or does it need thinkers, creators, and leaders who, challenge the status quo? What does the world really need? This is the moment when I realized I could no longer endorse this system. I couldn't continue teaching in a system that, operates this way. I couldn't. I was starting having, issues in my mind. But why? Because this system doesn't prepare our children for the future. It prepares them to walk a narrow path dictated by, external forces at the expense of their individuality, of their idiosyncrasy, and their potential, and also their happiness. All of this is sacrificed. And, making this decision wasn't easy. It's not as if I dreamed of, leaving my academic position, my career behind me, a career I worked many years. I worked very hard to build it, making countless sacrifices along the way. But at some point, I had to look at my son in the eyes and ask myself a simple question: can I really entrust him to this system? And the answer was a resounding no. Absolutely no. Because to entrust someone implies trust. And I no longer have faith in this education system. And I'm very sad to say this. So, ironically, this very system shaped who I am today. But I'm talking about the system in its previous form, not the one it has become today. I'm completely convinced that if education had been what it is today, back when I was growing up, I would have become a directionless adult. That's actually what I think. So this realization forced me to make a difficult decision, one filled with uncertainty and consequences I'm not even sure I'm fully prepared to handle. But I think it was a necessary decision. I had to make that decision. My son is only 5 years old. At that age, children ask, innocent yet profound questions. The other day, he asked me, "Daddy, if you teach me at home every day, if you teach me everything yourself at home, how are we going to make money to buy food? I don't have money to pay you." When he told me this, I won't lie to you, those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. It was like I was shocked, because I knew that by making this choice, I was putting everything on the line. Financial security, stability, everything I had worked so hard to build. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't remain in the system. I couldn't stay in the system that, crushes children's dream and reduces them to numbers, to grades, to products, and turns them into ideological puppets. I couldn't. And I'm not doing this just for him, I'm doing it for me too, because I was starting having hard time sleeping, and this had never happened to me before. So because every day I stayed in this system, I felt like I was becoming complicit in a machine that values profit over learning, obedience over innovation, a system that takes children full of potential and turns them into exhausted and disillusioned adults. I couldn't remain there. But you know what? The hardest part is not leaving the system. The hardest part is knowing that I have to start over from scratch. This is really the hardest part for me. I will have to figure out how to teach my son not just knowledge, but the skills and values he needs to succeed in a world that, won't hand him anything. In a challenging world. I will need to relearn how to educate, not by following a rigid curriculum, but by following his needs, his questions, his pace. Because teaching children is so much more challenging than teaching adult technical concepts. That's what I think. It's delicate, it's nuanced, and profoundly important, and difficult to teach children. In fact, I've always believed that we should require a doctorate, so a PhD degree, to teach in preschools, while a bachelor's or master's degree will suffice for university teaching. That's my position on this. And yet, despite the difficulty, I have no doubt about my decision, because by doing this, I'm giving my son a chance to become himself. Not what the system wants him to be, but what he has the potential to become. I'm not saying everyone should do what I'm doing. I'm not saying everyone should pull out their kids from schools, not at all. But I believe it's time we start asking the hard questions. Parents, teachers, even students need to start asking, who does this system really serve? And what can we do to change it? What's the way forward? Because, change doesn't start at the top. I deeply believe it starts with us at the bottom. Our choices, our voices can make a difference. It starts with the courage to say enough. When those so-called experts in brainwashing see that there is no one left in their schools to indoctrinate, maybe they will start questioning their method. I believe they need that kind of mental shock to start realizing how bad what they are doing to our kids is. And I want to use this moment to urge you, be deeply involved in your child's education. Ask them constantly what they are learning in school. You might be shocked by what they will tell you. Always ask them what they are learning in school. That's why I'm here today. That's why I'm speaking out. That's why I'm sharing this story. Because I want every parent to be conscious of what's really going on, because I want you to know that you are not alone. I actually thought for many years I was alone in this situation, but it turns out that many people, thousands of parents, believe the same thing, and people are just scared. They are afraid. They are not, courageous enough to speak out. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I understand how you feel about the system. I feel it too. And together I believe we can do something about this for my son, for your children, and for all of us. I'm sorry this has been such a long message. I initially planned to make a 5-minute video and then, head out for some exercise. But it's too late now for that. But that's fine, I don't regret it. If this story inspires even one person to question this system, to protect their child, then I will know I've done something good. So thank you for your attention. And so really be involved in your children's education. Don't think that school is doing everything for you. You have to take care of that education yourself. Even if they keep going to school, you have to make sure you get involved 100%. Thank you.